Hello, so in this tutorial I'll teach you how to create a page through the low code using the create form task. So we used this task before in the previous tutorials, but through the blocks perspective. So basically in the previous tutorials we were creating in the visual editor the blocks using the form module, and then we did it creating the blocks through low code using the create form task. This time we'll do something similar, but directly in the page level, not in the blocks level, but in the page level. So through low code. So to do that, we log in our framework, choose the workspace and the corresponding projects. And as we can see, this is a blank project where we currently have just one file, which is the index file with the default template. So in the previous tutorials, we just click it in this page. Now we want to click in the menu, and instead of clicking it to see the visual workspace, we want to go to the menu and choose the option code workspace. And after it opens the code workspace, we want to choose the low code tab, the diagram editor. So we click it here, and now we are seeing that we can create our own low code diagram. So first thing to do is to get some data, some metadata from our database, so then we can display it through the create form task. So let's just scroll down and choose the execute db-dow action. We could get some data from the database table in multiple other ways, just calling a business logic service or a query from the data access. We just, for the sake of this tutorial, just getting the data directly from the database. So because what we want to do here is to show multiple ways of creating HTML directly through low code in the page level. So first thing to do to get the data in this task, in the db-dow action task, we just choose correspondent method, which is find objects. We click here to get the correspondent table, and after we click OK, automatically it's created here. It created here a bunch of attributes and conditions. So currently we don't want any conditions because we want to get all schools. So we just disable the default condition and we put these records into a variable. So let's call a variable school. So we have the variable named schools. Okay. So now in here we have already a variable called schools with the correspondent metadata that the database returned, which are the schools. Okay, so now the next step is to call the create form task, which is in here. We just drag and drop it, we related both, and in here we will display the correspondent records that we got from the database, which will be the schools variable. So first thing to do is to set the input data, what is the variable to this task. So what is the variable that contains that records that I want to display through this task, through the create form task. So the variable is schools, that's the name that we gave, and it's a variable, so we just put here variable. Okay, so first step is done. Second step is to display the records that are inside of that variable. So we just add a container, we add a table. We have done this before in other tutorials. We click here add fields automatically, where we put here the fields that each record has, which are the school ID and the name. We just do add, automatically adds two columns here, which are the school ID and the name. By default is an editable table, so we make it read-only table by changing the text field from text to label, and the same thing in this one. And we save. So now we are getting, so we already in our workflow we have the schools variable with the metadata from the database, and in the create form task we have the HTML that we create to display the metadata there is inside of that variable. Okay, so for another thing that we didn't do, so the results. So in the first step we'll just echo, we just print that result so you can see in the page, and then we'll put this in a variable and display it in a specific region of the template. So just you can see multiple ways of doing basically the same thing. So don't forget that before we execute this code here, we cannot forget that this task here, the create form task, is using a class that we need to include first that specific class. So to do that, we go to the include file task, which is in here. We drop it into the middle here, and we find and include that specific class, which is in lib or PHP framework, util, web, and HTML, and it's HTML form handler. This is the name of the class. We just want to include these ones and we save it. Okay, perfect. So now that we have our workflow saved, if we preview this page, we should see already something here. Okay, it's perfect, it's here. But now, because we are doing the echo of that specific thing, that the specific HTML that the create form task it is creating. Now, but this is printing before the template. Imagine that I want to print this in some region of the template. So I know this template has two regions. One top region, which is above this sentence, and another region which is below this sentence. So the region that is below this sentence, the name is content, and I want to print this list in here. So how do I do that? Okay, so what we need to do is we need to go back to our create form task. Instead of printing it, what we want to do is we want to simply put it into a variable. Let's call this variable school_HTML. Let's save it. And now what we want to do is we want to create, we want to pass that variable to that specific region of that template. So how do we do that? So there is a task here in the layers group, which is called add region HTML. So we just drop it here, we connect it both, and in here we put our variable that we created. Don't forget to say here there is variable. Now we need to put the region. So the region name is content. How do I know? Because if you click, this project has a default template, so if you click here default, you can see the name of the regions that the template has. So I already know this by default, otherwise you could just click here and see it. Okay, so let's just save this task, save the workflow, and let's just let's just execute the page again to preview it. And here it is. So as we can see, we are seeing the school list in the correspondent region. So this is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it, it will be instead of creating here a region, so let's just erase this. So I erase this, I save the workflow, and if I refresh it should disappear. Okay, it disappeared. So instead of doing this, I could just go to my template here and echo as a variable inside of my HTML. So I showed you this before in the previous tutorials, where basically just drop here a specific the correspondent widget, which is a PHP widget, and in here we just type the correspondent variable, which was the schools_HTML. I'm typing here a few codes. It's low code if you want, but you could do this through the diagram if you wanted to. I have some tutorials that show how to do this before. In the previous lessons there is one that teach you how to do that. So I just save this, and now if I execute this, I should see the same thing, the schools here. Let's say that I want to drag this here. So I should see the schools appearing before, or in this case not before, but in this case it appears inside of page 1. If I want it before, I needed to move up, before the sentence. So here it is. This is just an example. If I want it here, put it here, and refresh. As you can see, it's like multiple ways of doing exactly the same thing. I prefer always not to print variables here, but I prefer always to go to my diagram codes, don't forget to use the code workspace, and in my local diagram to create the correspondent region HTML, which is inside of the layers, which is this one, as we did this before. I always prefer to do this because it's a much more cleaner way of doing the things. Okay, variable, save, refresh, perfect. Okay, now let's say that here in the create form task we want to convert this to PTL. The same thing, we just go here, we choose PTL, and automatically we have here our PTL code. If the same thing, if we don't know anything about HTML, we can just come here, go to the visual, and edit directly the PTL through here. I showed you this before in the other examples. I can do it now. It's just an example. Item in here, and in here will be item. Okay, I save this, and if I save this, well, let me just, for the sake of this tutorial, let me just showing something here that you can see. Let's put here school, my school, so you can see that it really changed something. And I refresh. It's exactly the same thing. So multiple different ways of showing what you want through local, through visual editors, through blocks, directly in the page level, whatever. There are multiple ways of doing the same thing. I believe that's all. So thank you very much.